it isn't just a kind of qualitative approach. You don't just say, oh, is it good or not good? It is, you work out the sorts of people who buy the books in your store. And if they buy that sort of book, then you'll get that book in, and you won't, be sort of thinking, well, is it good? Is it a good true crime book or whatever? The fact is, if we sell loads of Jack the Ripper books and someone's got a new Jack the Ripper book out, we'll stock it.
Welcome to the Stark Reflections on Writing and Publishing podcast. There has never been a better time for writers. More information, options, and opportunities are available to you, but navigating these requires insight. Join Mark Leslie Lefebvre as he draws upon more than a quarter century of experience as a writer, a bookseller, and a trusted book industry consultant to explore and reflect on the writing and publishing landscape to help you make informed choices on your writer journey.
Hello, Reflectives, and welcome to episode 205 of the Stark Reflections podcast. This is your host, Mark Leslie Lefebvre. In today's episode, I have an interview with Simon Lowe, who is an author with a number of stories published in various magazines over the years. And after a decade of working in bookstores, he released his first novel in June of 2021, and he now writes part-time while also performing the role of a stay-at-home dad. And we'll get to that interview with Simon later in this episode. First, a word from this episode's sponsor. This episode is sponsored by Findaway Voices. Findaway Voices is a platform that allows authors and small publishers the ability to get their audiobooks out into a global market of more than 43 retailer and library markets. If you're looking for a narrator, you can leverage Findaway Voices and their platform of thousands of professional narrators from around the world. When you put in your request for a narrator, they'll have a project manager go through and find the 5 to 10 narrators from different price ranges and different styles that meet what you are looking for in a narrator. So you can work with someone who knows the audio business to get your audio book produced, so you're not on your own. If you already have an audiobook available and have all the rights to it, you can use Findaway Voices for distribution. And with their global market, you can set the price at 99% of those markets. There's also promotional opportunities through their partners. They have Chirp, which is owned by BookBub, and the only way to get books into Chirp is through Findaway Voices. Findaway Voices has lots of controls. They put you in charge of your audiobook empire. And if you want to see how you can leverage Findaway Voices, you can check them out over at starkreflections.ca/Findaway. And a wonderful thank you to Findaway for being a longtime sponsor of this podcast. I'm just so pleased with the folks at Findaway and just how wonderfully they treat authors. And I'm just remembering how Will from Findaway approached me when this podcast, which is now over 200 episodes, it was very early on. And he approached me wanting to support the podcast. And I love the way that they support the creators out there in so many different ways. They're an amazing company to work with. Now, that sponsorship from Findaway helps pay for the hosting fees for the podcast. That as the stats go up and more people are downloading, and they need more and more space, and the costs go up, so that covers those costs quite brilliantly. But I also want to thank the patrons to the show whose support pays a little bit for my time in producing the show. And I want to send out a huge thank you to all my existing patrons, as well as 3 new patrons that joined in the last couple of weeks. So welcome to Talina Winters, Rachel Amphlett, and Carolyn Stein. Thank you guys so much for joining the patrons. I wonder, or I suspect, if maybe one of my recent episodes, The Rant, seemed to resonate with people. And I don't know what it was, but there was like this wonderful influx of new patrons. So thank you so much, ladies, for joining the wonderful, small but powerful, I like to say, team of patrons who support this podcast over on patreon.com/starkreflections. I hope you gained access to the additional episodes, the Stark Reflections on other podcasts, as well as some of the other things like the unedited version of my rant on unprofessional author behavior. So thank you guys so much. I'm actually so close. I'm nearing that point where I'm going to be able to do some Q&A stuff and more direct interactions with patrons. And that's really, really close. So thank you guys so much. If you're interested in supporting the podcast, you can do it over on patreon.com/starkreflections, but you can also support the podcast, of course, just by continuing to listen, because you listening does mean a lot to me as well. You can leave a review on the podcatcher of your choice, or what really helps as well is share this podcast with someone that you think would find value in it. So thank you to all my patrons, all my new patrons, as well as to all you beautiful listeners out there. And now for comments from recent episodes. On episode 203, a rant on unprofessional behavior, Rebecca Carter, writing as Ronisa Avila along with Nelly Tonchiva, says, I feel your pain. I've been an admin of various groups aimed at helping authors promote themselves. I've spent hours and days setting up free author pages that other groups charge a significant fee to do. Some authors are extremely grateful, while others drop out without a word. I'm grateful for D2D selecting some of our books for various promotions, even though my friend and I write in a niche market. We'll likely never have the hundreds of sales a day that those who write in popular genres do, but we are thankful for the opportunity to have our books in the free promos to get more exposure in other markets. Little by little, we'll build up our presence there, but the boost we get from your promos is so helpful. Thank you, and all those who support those efforts. Thank you so much for the comment, Rebecca. I really appreciate that. I'm sorry. I guess you feel the pain of trying to help people and create things when they may not be as willing to help themselves. But I do appreciate your perspective on recognizing what you and your co-author are writing in a niche market, and even recognizing, like, just knowing, okay, in the thing that we're writing, because the retailers may not, focus as much on promoting those, and they may not be put on the main pages anywhere, but you're writing something you're passionate about and you believe in. And in the long run, the thing you're writing about that you're passionate about, there are readers who are just as passionate, maybe even more passionate about those things you're reading. And when they discover it, that's gold. That's magnificent. And I love that you're thinking that long-term approach, obviously appreciating whatever different promotions that come along the way, but just recognizing that it's really writing those things that you really, really enjoy, and that when the right reader finds it in those niche markets, they're going to adore it and stick with you for the long run. Because I'm always about the long-term thinking. So thank you for that comment, Rebecca. And for episode 204, Overcoming Self-Doubt with Tessa Smith McGovern, Katie Mack says, excellent advice from Tessa Smith McGovern. She doesn't need to call herself a perfectionist with all the negative connotations that stick to that word. She's just determined to be a good writer. And that's a great point, Katie, because we often are hard on ourselves, too hard on ourselves. And even as Tessa's helping other authors overcome self-doubt, I mean, she was even using, terms that could be considered derogatory towards herself. I mean, it's funny, I didn't even pick up on that, but yeah, I guess calling yourself a perfectionist is not necessarily a bad thing, because again, she's focused on wanting to get the best writing she can out there, because she recognizes when she makes that work as good as she can. And I love some of the tools that Tessa provided that she shared and talked about. When you do that, you're making it that much better for the reader, and again, for the long term. So great point, Katie. And it's so funny, because we really do. We really are too hard on ourselves, and it's okay to cut ourselves some slack, or just consider the terminology that we use. For example, I was doing a live thing for When Words Collide just this week. And this is early August as I'm recording this. And Stina Holmes, who has been a guest on this show, I have to have her back. She's just so amazing. It was great to talk to her again. When we were talking with Stina and the other guests of honor from When Words Collide, she used the term, I think it was called headlight writer. Instead of writing into the dark or pantsing. And what she says is, she knows where she's going, but all she's doing is focusing on that one scene ahead of her, and just kind of like when you're driving and you're just looking just to where your headlights go, and so she doesn't fully plot out the books, but she enjoys that because if she plots it out too much in advance, it feels like she's already told the story. And so instead of calling yourself a pantser, you're using a term that's a little bit more exciting, a little bit more or less maybe derogatory because of the styles of writing. Because everyone's going to approach the way that they write unique to them, and so we want to embrace that and embrace who we are. And so thank you. That was a bit of a reflective tangent, but thanks for that comment. Thank you, Katie, and thank you, Rebecca, for those comments. You can leave your comments for any episode over at starkreflections.ca. You can also at me on Twitter. I am at Mark Leslie. And just a brief personal update. I'm currently in the throes of When Words Collide, which is a virtual conference that's taking place over the weekend of August 13th, 14th, and of 15. I've got 12-hour days ahead of me. It is going to be fun and exciting, but exhausting at the same time. And Joanna Penn and I just got back, the relaxed author, from our proofreader. And so we're going to be making some final tweaks and beginning the recording of the audiobook version. So I better get cracking. That's enough of a personal update for this episode. Why don't we jump into this fascinating interview with Simon Lowe? Simon, welcome to the Stark Reflections podcast.
Thank you, Mark. Thanks for having me.
Oh, it's delightful to have you here. Now, we're recording this the first week of June, second week of June, I suppose, because, first full week of June, let's say.
Yeah.
And as of 2 days ago, we're recording this on June 9th. As of 2 days ago, you launched a new novel, correct?
That's right. Yeah. The World is at War Again. So, it came out in paperback on the 7th. So, yeah.
What was it in hardcover prior to?
No, it wasn't. No, It went directly into. It's a funny size actually. It's a kind of slightly larger paperback.
Really? Yeah, so, okay. First of all, before we get into the dimensions of the paperback, tell us a little bit about the book.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Well, I used to be a bookseller, so dimensions of books,
of course,
is quite interesting. But hopefully, the book's more interesting. The World is at War Again. It's a novel that I suppose speculative fiction, in the sense that there's a sort of central conceit that we're living in a time where the world is at war. I don't say World War III or any specific type of war, but there's a general war in the air, and because of this, it was thought by the government that new technology, modern technology, had become a security risk and that it needed to be stopped. So all new technology is abandoned and we revert. I call it the Great Regression, and we go back to a time before new technology.
Well, like
that's the kind of
MP3s and.
Yeah, I mean, it's not particularly scientific. It is more a general kind of. I was trying to really encapsulate more of a sense of a time when before we had technology as we have it now, in terms of the relationships with the characters and the people, rather than sort of playing on the devices or the kind of particular aspects of technology. And so within this kind of world, we have sort of various characters. We have a teenage boy who is sent to a boarding school, kind of at the last minute, very mysteriously, and then his parents are sort of undercover spies, and they go off on a mission. And there's a sort of more of a super spy character who she is sent to the boarding school to work undercover. And sort of within this, it's various sort of genre, I suppose. Sort of a spy thriller, coming of age, comic kind of caper, really.
Wow.
I suppose it's one of those books. It's quite hard to describe. And at the time, I thought, "Oh, this is great! I'm covering all these bases." But in reality, I'm just making it slightly difficult to explain. And you know what it's like. People want you to be able to say within 2 sentences the elevator pitch or whatever. This is exactly what it is. But it's difficult. So so it's split. It goes between characters and they all convene in various ways. But yeah, it's a sort of a mixture really. But the speculative fiction side, it it's there, but it doesn't get too sort of bogged down in that, really.
Because it's modern day, except with the war going on, the technology.
Yeah, I mean, I
Okay.
suppose there's another strand is the sort of satire really of it all. It's the idea is that everything's quite sort of unknown and nebula, and no one really knows what exactly the war is and who's
Right.
winning, and no one's really sure kind of what the government are kind of doing or what's going on. It kind of has a sort of vague sense of openness really to what's going on. I suppose it's kind of it was a react. I think it began really when I read a few books about children in schools, in boarding schools in the Second World War, kind of American books. Richard Yates one, and I think a Tobias Wolff one, and it wasn't really the sort of thing I would write, but it appealed to me, this idea of, can you imagine sort of being a teenager at school, and could be your dad flying above in the in the airplane and stuff. And I was just thinking, I enjoyed the books. It's not something I would write, but I thought it would be nothing like that now.
Right.
The equivalent now, and particularly when I first started thinking about it, it was quite a long time ago, and it wasn't long after kind of Iraq and Afghanistan, and just a general sense of why are we always at war? When does it become a world war? All these countries, troops everywhere, and no one's quite sure what the end goal is. And so it's just this so different, the contrast to, say, the Second World War. And then also, being a teenager now compared to then, the idea was really that they probably wouldn't even know or care there was a world war on. It wouldn't be relayed to them in the same way, and you wouldn't have that sort of clarity of what was happening. And so it was more in the general sort of fuzz of that environment, that sort of society, and that's where the sort of characters are placed, really.
Now, when you were describing, taking away some of the technology, it almost, I was drawing some parallels to taking away some ability to meet with other people, to socially gather. Are there any parallels between what's happening right now, our war against this virus?
I suppose the other way, I suppose it's in terms of my sort of prescientness, not really, because I suppose what we've learned now is that technology is very helpful during a pandemic. Look at us now. And I suppose part of my novel is going back to different forms of communication, different ways of being with each other. I think particularly for the teenagers, it's so different for them not to have phones, or to create friendships and in a different way, in ways that they have to sort of just that. I think more difficult because they have to speak to each other and they have to articulate successfully, which is difficult, when you're a teenager.
There's no short.
Yeah, exactly. So it's awkward. There's lots of awkwardness and trying to appear one way, and you can't sort of fake it like maybe you can now. You can't create your Instagram account or whatever to look a particular way. You are what you are. You look that way. You can't airbrush it with your pimples and your awkwardness, and that's how you sort of have to be in the world. And I suppose that nowadays, I don't know, it's different, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, how do you spell LOL long form?
Yeah, exactly. It's completely language, everything is different in the book. So as much as anything else, I think part of that was a kind of I'm not absolutely the most technological person, so when I had the idea, it almost was a relief when I thought, I could do it where there is no technology. because I could just write characters, I could just write people and conversations, and I wouldn't need to have that sort of conflicting feeling of, well, I need to incorporate the reality of how people are these days.
Right.
I didn't want to write a book that's, partly emails and texts, and that was knowing of the kind of modern world, really, because that I didn't feel very confident doing that. And I don't know. I think it's hard. I think it's hard to write novels these days that are kind of have that authenticity to the way we do relate and communicate. And I think it's tempting, isn't it, to go back to when I was a teenager, if I'm writing a teenage character, then trying to figure out how it is today. It feels easier to me anyway as a writer when you're trying to focus on characters and how people are with each other. I think to have as much space and freedom to do that without anything else needing to kind of get in the way, I think feels slightly more rewarding, I think.
It's interesting, as a writer, you have the choice potentially to set it in the past before cell phones and smartphones, or set it in an indeterminable now where something's happened to remove that, right? The point is you want a bunch of people interacting directly with each other.
yeah, exactly. That's it. Yeah, it's just that removal of kind of barriers, really. And I think I don't know in contemporary fiction or in writing how much of a problem that is for writers, or whether they even think about it. I don't know. I mean, I still think that for me, I mean, when I'm writing, it doesn't occur to me to immediately think about people on their phones or their computers. That doesn't.
Yeah.
But I don't know.
It could also be part of character development, where there's the one person who's always heads down, not part of the reality realm.
Yeah, exactly. Totally. Yeah. I mean, I think it does make you realize that, when you are writing characters and trying to create relationships between characters and put characters in scenarios, how many of those external factors are at play does make a difference to what you write and how you write it, really. And that includes the society that the characters are in and what's going on, I suppose, as much as anything else.
Now, you mentioned earlier, and it got me excited about it, but I've held off asking about it. But you said that you were a bookseller. That's why the dimensions of the book, you paid attention. It was not the standard,
exactly. Yeah.
8.5 by 5.5 or 6 by 9 or whatever. So what, tell me about the dimensions, and then I'm dying to get into your bookseller war stories.
I don't know. Well, when I was a bookseller, I don't know how it is that we had things, it was called a B form. We had an A format, a B format, and a C format. And the A format was the kind of smaller, chunkier, more commercial sort of fiction.
Is that like mass market?
Exactly.
In North America? Okay.
Yeah, mass market. And the more literary books would be a slightly larger C format. B format. And then a C format would be the size of a hardback, but in a paperback. So that's what I.
Which they use the same plates to make a hardcover.
Okay. Whereas this is a kind of like a B.5, somewhere between a B and a C. So it's not slightly larger, slightly taller, really, than a B format, but not.
Can you hold one up? Do you have one?
Yeah, I've got one here. Yeah.
Okay.
Can you tell?
I see that. I see that now. Yeah.
Slightly narrower.
Taller.
Yeah.
There were a kind of mass market that was coming out of some UK publications, I remember, because I'm in Canada. We would get stuff from the US and the UK.
Right.
And they did tend to be the longer, taller. They were almost the same width as them. Yeah, interesting.
Well, I think there was that period. I don't know what it's like now. There was a period where they were sort of slightly phasing out hardbacks, but they still wanted not to go directly into the paperback size. So kind of in between, which I don't know. I don't think they do that as much now.
Well, when I started in bookselling, we had hardcovers and mass market, and the only books that were published in that in between, the B size, you would call it, were literary fiction.
Exactly.
Literary. There was genre, and if it was literary, if it was an Oprah feature, it was always that. So when I started in the early 90s book selling, is like if a title was that format, I knew that it was going to be like highbrow literary.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's it. Because I think genre is different, isn't it? When I've not been to Canada, I don't know if it's the same in the States, but because we don't have. Do you have a mystery genre? See, we don't have mystery.
Is it
We
crime?
just have crime. Yeah. So
Okay.
but I don't know if they're identical
Well,
or not.
we think of crime as a one type of mystery, so it's a subgenre.
Right.
So
Okay.
crime meaning police procedural and a
Yeah.
detective and Sherlock Holmes potentially, as
Yeah.
opposed to cozy mysteries. So it's like this larger,
Okay. Right.
yeah. Whereas thrillers would go right into the fiction section typically.
Yeah. Yeah. That would be the same here. Yeah. But we would so would you have a separate crime section as well as a mystery section?
We had a true crime section, which was
Yeah. So yeah.
non-fiction books about. But
Yeah.
so, I mean, in Canada, as a bookseller, when somebody asked for crime, I would usually say, "Are you looking for true crime, or are you
Okay.
looking
Right.
for detective kind of
Right.
police crime procedurals?" Like, "Oh no, I
Yeah.
want the
Yeah.
Michael Connelly." It's like, "Okay, well, you're heading over to mystery then." Or no, I want to
Okay.
read about John Wayne Gacy and the
Yeah.
Jack the Ripper. And like, oh no, you're heading over to the other one.
Right.
So yeah, it's always interesting. Although an interesting fact is, whenever anyone came into my bookstore, and for the 20 odd years I was in physical bookstores, anytime somebody came in and asked for, where are your nonfiction books, because the whole store was nonfiction except for the fiction section, right?
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
Like three
I
quarters of the
know.
store was
Yeah.
nonfiction. Where are your nonfiction books? Over time, I didn't even ask anymore. I would just take them right to the true crime section, and I was never
Bro.
wrong. I was never wrong.
Right.
He was like, "Where are your
That's
where are your nonfiction?" I'm like, "Oh, okay, over here."
I know, it's amazing. Like I always was amazed by the amount of people who just seemingly by walking into a bookstore just seem to lose confidence and sense of what they were doing, and it was amazing, kind of just fear, and it's like, oh well, where would I find this, or where would where would I find that book on World War II? And it's just, yet I don't know. That they know. You just go to the history
Yeah,
section
they
and
they
find
they
it.
made it
But there's
here.
something, isn't there, about walking in, for some people, just walking into a bookstore, they feel very intimidated and sort of are at a loss to kind of know what to do, how to find the thing they're looking for.
Yeah, it
I
is
don't know.
interesting. So where did you start working in bookstores? How long were you in them?
So when I moved to London, I started working in bookstores, and I worked in bookstores for about 10 years. I worked for the main chain here, Waterstones.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was in a store just a little bit further out of London. It was quite a big store, but yeah, I loved it. That was felt very much like like a trade. Being a bookseller felt like a specific
Oh
kind of
yeah, well,
skill set,
respectable trade
and
too,
it
right?
was, yeah, exactly. Yeah,
You're dealing in the creation of this, world-changing
yeah,
text, right?
completely. And I think being involved in all the different aspects, the buying and the not just the selling and the sort of merchandising and author events, all that kind of thing. Yeah, it is. And like you were saying earlier, it's just being around other people, colleagues, public,
Right.
authors.
Especially talking about books.
Yeah, exactly.
So
Yeah.
your experience as a bookseller, how did that inform you in two different ways? I'm curious to explore. How did that inform you as a writer, and how did that inform your decisions on how to publish this? And because I'm not sure how you published it, I'm curious to know. But like in terms of the cover and deciding all these things.
Well, I think it definitely was a huge help working kind of in the book trade beforehand. I think it gives you a good, clear understanding of how it works, how the business works, and from that, especially with the buying side, because you got a good sense of the fact that it isn't just a kind of qualitative approach. You don't just say, oh, is it good or not good? It is, you work out the sorts of people who buy the books in your store. And if they buy that sort of book, then you'll get that book in, and you won't, be sort of thinking, well, is it good? Is it a good true crime book or whatever? The fact is, if we sell loads of Jack the Ripper books and someone's got a new Jack the Ripper book out, we'll stock it.
It's a good book if people are buying it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And if someone comes and says, well, this guy's probably going to win the Nobel Prize at one point, or this is going to be, if that's not the market, then you would turn it down, because it's, it is a marketplace. And I think once you have that, you're comfortable with that, then that certainly helped. So for example, with rejection from agents and publishers, it was fine, because I did kind of think back to my book selling days and was like, yeah, it's fine, I understand it. It's a mix of all different genres. It's not maybe obvious where it sits, hard to pin it down. As a publisher and agent, that's probably not ideally what you're after. You
Yeah.
probably want to say it's exactly like this guy's the new so and so, and they can work with that. And so I knew that it would be a case of not taking it personally, not taking that as, oh, they don't think it's a very good book. And so I eventually found a publisher who was sort of open to something a bit different.
So how did you find this publisher? I guess so it was queries through agents and editors, and
it was just internet kind of Google. So I think initially I didn't kind of clock on to the speculative fiction aspect of it. I don't know why. I just kind of hadn't thought that I could frame it in that way. And then it was after I kind of sent it out to a few. I'd had a few sort of nice rejections, and just general sort of, it's interesting, but just don't know what we'd do with it kind of thing.
What section of Waterstones would we put it in?
Yeah, exactly.
Would it go in literary? Would it go in science fiction?
Yeah, we just need mystery. And so in the end, there was a publisher, and I came across them, found their website, and it was like, oh yeah, I suppose it is kind of speculative fiction, and it's comic, and they seemed very, and I sent it to them. They had I was lucky really, because they had a short window of, I think, like 4 weeks, once a year, 4-week window, and it just happened
really
just to be kind of 2 weeks away. And so I was like, oh, I just had a feeling that they seem like the sorts of people who would publish it. They're called Elsewhere Press, and they've just been, they've been amazing. And so they've taken it on, and they're kind of, as you would hope from a small publisher, really, they're not massively commercially minded. They just liked it,
right?
Which is what you want to hear, don't you? Really, when you're not, you just want to hear someone say, yeah, I really like it, we'll publish it. It's not because we think we're going to make millions off the back of it necessarily, just because we want to.
I think the small publishers tend to be, in my experience, they tend to be the ones that take those chances. And even if they can't easily put it here or compare it to this and that, right, where it's kind of between those easily classifiable, definable things, they find these new authors, these new voices, and they're able to do something with it because they believe in it. And then those often become the next big things.
Yeah, totally. I think it is a much more kind of exciting area of publishing to be in, because for the big publishers, it is kind of, there's a bit of a blueprint. It's a machine, and it does feel a little bit like they're getting writers who they want to do a specific job, and fill a gap in the market. And there's, I don't know, I think it is a slightly less creative world, really.
So this is your first novel?
Yes. Yeah.
I've
written quite a few short stories, which have been published in various places. I've written loads of stuff, and never kind of finished it. I think being a bookseller and being, it was just nice. It was just nice being in that world, writing at weekends, spare time. and working in the bookstore, and I didn't really take it too seriously. I think for a long time I just liked having that as something, a sort of project really on the side. And I didn't, but it was really after I stopped being a bookseller, and then I trained as a therapist for a little while, and it was really when I was training to be a therapist that I started really thinking about, what I wanted to do and who I wanted to be and all that kind of deep stuff. And it was from that I thought, actually, I'm being a bit sort of cowardly here. I need to. It's probably is quite important to me, and it does have, it's quite a big deal for me, and so I should try and do it properly. And so that's when I kind of committed to writing this, and and trying to find a publisher. And then we had our son as well, kind of around that time, and I was a kind of stay-at-home dad. So it kind of, in a way, quite slow process, but I sort of felt like actually, yeah, this could work really.
So what did you have to do differently? So you had published short stories before, and
Yeah,
then the difference in terms of the way you approached that as opposed to the novel. What did you have to learn?
yeah, and definitely. So I mean, the novel is, it has structure and plot and these kind of things, which I wasn't wholly comfortable with. But I quite like the idea of having a go at doing something that seems to have a kind of very clearly defined sort of almost genre-led, even though it's sort of a few different genres maybe. I quite like the idea because a lot of the stuff I've been writing before was fairly sort of oddball, kind of eccentric, but it's okay for a short story, but it's quite hard to sustain that for an entire novel without just being slightly annoying and not quite knowing why why do 300 pages of this. So um, I just I think I just worked at finding a structure. I mean, in fairness, it's got 15 chapters. Pretty much every chapter is 5,000 words, and I pretty much wrote every chapter like I would have done a short story.
Oh,
Just in.
interesting. Okay.
And I found that I surprised myself really, because I didn't think that's kind of how I would work. But yeah, I found that a lot easier to just think I've just got these 5,000 words that I just need to make as good as I can, and then I'll just repeat that process really.
Nice way to chunk it down into manageable work.
Yeah, exactly. I kind of I don't know, it's like when you sort of start, you listen to so many other people's advice and ideas, and these sort of, I think the most common one is, just write, just let it all out, but I just I find that I stray too much, I think, into places where I know I'm going to have to come out of in the end. So it just didn't seem, I did try that for a while, but I just thought, actually no, just doing it in more sort of bite-sized chunks is a lot easier.
Oh wow, intriguing. So the book has just recently been released. It looks like you're doing a blog tour, a whole bunch of
Yeah.
promotion around that. Is that a combination of you, your publisher? How's that
Yeah,
workload?
yeah, exactly. Well, me, the publisher, there's also a PR company involved as well. Um, so yeah, I mean, I don't, it's more, I think, for me, the sort of a sense of having fun with it and doing things like this, interviews, and seeing what people think makes me feel like, I suppose, a proper author. I wouldn't say there's a huge marketing plan or a massive amount of ambition there, but it's nice, I think, especially, when you spend so much time doing something, it's nice to feel that you're kind of getting the maximum out of it. So
Right.
if I can do some interviews and press and get some reviews and be part of that sort of world for a few months, that would be kind of exciting for me.
Excellent. The book is out in paperback. It's available in ebook as well.
It is available on ebook. Yeah. It actually came out on ebook first, which it's something the publishers do. To be honest, I didn't fully get
To
the
get early reviews, maybe?
I'm not sure. I think I did ask, but yeah, they do a sort of an ebook launch for all their titles 3 months before the paperback.
Right.
But I'm not 100% sure on what the sort of model is for that, or why that would work. But I don't know, because going into it, because I hadn't been a bookseller for a while, and I sort of felt a little bit out of my depth, because just things like I wasn't sure if the ebook market was a different market, a whole other world, or whether ebooks were just the same as physical books, that just a choice, a sort of personal choice people made, or whether people sought out ebooks specifically. And I got the sense that there is a kind of an ebook world. So I don't know whether, that requires a two-prong attack kind of thing. I don't know.
Interesting. So where can people find out more about you, your book, your short stories?
Yeah, so everything's on my website, which is www.simonlowebooks.com. And everything's on there really. Elsewhen Press is the publisher. They have a website with all the details there as well. But it's available in all the usual places. So I should be able to find a copy quite easily.
Awesome, and I'm sure they can even order it through their local library too.
Absolutely, yeah. It's it's available everywhere. So it's nice. It's nice when you kind of can look it up on the computer and see it's there. And so you can tell anyone that they can get hold of a copy quite easily.
So I wanted to focus on something that Simon talked about to just make the process more manageable for writing the novel, for getting the novel finished. And so this is for those of you who are working on just getting that novel finished and having that challenge, breaking it into smaller chunks. I mean, this is something that works for almost any task, but specifically we're talking about writing. Have to get this done. How do you break it into smaller chunks? So it's basically, instead of thinking about it as the novel, you maybe have, if you've plotted or mapped out what it's going to be, it's broken down into scenes and chapters. Maybe it's, roughly, I think Simon said about 5,000 words at a time, which, having written and published so many short stories, that was something he was already comfortable with. So it was something he has practiced at. So when he was working on the novel, he took the same sort of approach, and he thought of each, scene or chapter in that way. He's like, okay, I just need to get through that. It kind of goes back to the reflection I had prior to the interview with Simon, although it was after the interview with Simon, but prior in this episode, in the timeline that you're listening to all of this, unless you've skipped around. Let's not go there. Time travel is just too challenging. But what Stina Holmes had talked about with the headlight writing is she's only focusing on those next 5,000, I'm roughly putting words in her mouth, but then those next 5,000 words, because that's what she's focused on right now, and getting from that point A to point B. So it's kind of like that biofeedback as you're creating. You're like, oh, wow, okay, there's another 5,000 words. So it's not, oh my God, I have another 50,000 words to write, or whatever. You're just thinking, nope, chunks about 5,000 words, or 1,000 words, whatever that happens to be for you. And that's the key, is there's no one way of doing things. Simon found a way by breaking it into manageable chunks. Obviously, Stina does something similar. They're just thinking about, okay, here's where I know it's going to end up, but how am I going to get there? Well, we'll see what route we end up taking. And that's a really great way to think about it, because sometimes when we look at those tasks ahead of us as writers, whether it's getting the manuscript done, getting the rewriting done, all of the things to do with the launch or marketing or any of those business aspects, maybe looking at breaking it down into those manageable chunks where you can just get this done. Say, okay, I have all of this to do. How do I break that down? That's just one strategy you can use. There's so many other interesting things about Simon's interview, but of course I'm just going to stick to one reflection here, since I reflected earlier on in the episode, and I'm curious what your reflections might be. You can leave comments for your reflections over at starkreflections.ca. Other than that, this is the end of episode 205. Thank you so much for listening to the podcast. The show notes are over at starkreflections.ca, and as I said, that's where you can also leave comments. And so, until next week and next episode, this is Mark Leslie Lefebvre wishing you great writing and good Stark Reflections.
Thank you for listening to the Stark Reflections podcast. You can find show notes for each episode at starkreflections.ca.
The music for this podcast, Laser Groove, was composed and produced by Kevin MacLeod. Check out more of Kevin's great music at incomptech.com.